Hello, I'm Barbaralee Diamonstein-Spielvogel, and welcome to each and all of you to this evening's conversation with architect Liz Diller about the landmarks of tomorrow, an event that is co-sponsored by Landmarks West, the Historic Districts Council, and HLPC. Special thanks to both organizations for their important work in making this evening possible and for your ongoing work, not only in your historic district, Arlene and Simeon, but throughout the city. At the end of this discussion, we encourage you to ask some questions on your own. There should be a card on your seat. If you don't have one, raise your hand and someone will give one to you. So please write down your focused and friendly questions. And all during our conversation, they will be collected and then passed up to me. And then at the end of our conversation, we will address your questions. And now let us begin, Liz. Today we are talking to the celebrated and distinguished architect, Elizabeth Diller, who together with her husband and partner, Rick Scofidio, founded their interdisciplinary design studio in 1979. By 1990, Charles Renfrew joined them to form Diller, Scofidio, plus Renfrew. All three of the partners, at least they say, work collaboratively on the architecture and design of each project in their studio, which now employs more than 40 architects and has major assignments of cultural and civic significance, including the ones we'll be discussing tonight. Their work includes housing and residential designs, museums, cultural centers, institutional master plans, as well as theater and performance pieces and site-specific installations. Please join me in welcoming Liz Diller, architect, professor, artist, urban theorist, transdisciplinarian, and so much more. You were born and spent the first 6 years of your life in one of the most admired film centers in the world, Łódź, Poland. Did that environment have a lingering influence on you?
Wow, that's a very good question. I was very young when my family immigrated to the U.S. I have to say, coincidentally, I was very interested in being a filmmaker. I'm not sure that the two had anything in common, but I was very interested in, as a teenager, introduced to independent films and just became very, very hungry and for watching a lot of international independent films, and then I had a longing to make movies on my own.
Did you ever try that yet?
Well, there's still you know, a little bit of life to go, so I think I can. Hopefully, I'll get there. No, when I went to Cooper Union and I studied art and with the hope of actually being a photographer and then filmmaker, I took a bunch of courses, and then I took a course called architectonics, which was curious. I didn't know what it meant, and I somehow succumbed to architecture.
Who taught that course?
It was John Haydock. That was he was the dean and guru, and actually Rick was teaching there at the time. There was something about architecture as a discipline that really grabbed me, and never with the intention of being an architect, but more about the kind of discourse around architecture, and actually this kind of war between 2D and 3D continued as I was in school, because I kept thinking 2D, and in time, and then all of a sudden 3D. But I graduated with an architecture degree, again, never with the intention of doing professional architecture. And then one thing led to another, and I kind of took, the right way instead of the left way, and I ended up doing both, but I never made a movie, and I never made a serious movie.
Unserious movies?
Yes, lots of little
like
baby movies, just little things, and not very important. But I took sheriff film courses, and I think that if I had a second career, that's like the unfulfilled part of my career that I would love to really sculpt 2 hours of time and tell a story.
Do you have a story in mind other than your own?
Not really specifically. Like I wouldn't be pitching, an idea right now. But Rick and I, for many years, have been interested in performance, and that's one outlet that we have been able to take and work for independent theater, experimental theater and dance, and to a point where we were kind of generating our own ideas and arranging collaborators around us. And even to this day, we're kind of delving into the opera and coming up with new projects and getting collaborations around us. So not in the role of doing stage sets or anything like that. It's much more around staging principles and about concepts and stories, and working in that medium, really thinking hard about the relationship between an audience and performers, and really kind of pushing the envelope.
As a teenager, you've said that you made your own context and were a self-defined rebel, pushing the envelope again, I guess. How did you rebel?
Did I say I rebelled?
Yes, several times in several things.
I guess I never wore jeans. I never had a pair of bell bottoms. I distinctly...
More serious things, like you didn't tell your parents what your major was.
Yes, yeah, that was true, because my parents did want to see me in a profession that actually could make a living. And I just really wanted to be an independent artist and filmmaker, and I had no idea how I was going to support myself. So architecture was a kind of refrain for them, especially my mom, who just thought that was a great way to marry artistic and kind of technical and professional interests. But I really made a point of defying my parents, and actually really didn't have much of an interest in architecture until that world opened up to me, and I became really engaged. And then somehow, so when I graduated, when I changed my degree course, I was an art major and I changed to architecture, and it was time for graduation. Of course, took a long time to get my degree anyway, so what should have taken 4 took like 7 years or so. When it was finally time to do the graduation ceremony, at that point my parents found out that I had an architecture degree.
What took you 7 years?
Well, first of all, it's a 5-year program, and I had also taken a year off, and I was taking my time a little bit.
By the way, would that description, rebel, still hold true?
Oh boy, I guess when you're, you kind of want to define your own path. You don't necessarily think of yourself in those terms. I don't think that we've taken a course that is normal and linear. And I don't, I think that the kinds of work that, particularly in the last 10 years, that we've been involved with have necessitated different kinds of skill sets than I ever thought I had. So while, let's say, in the 90s, I was able to throw grenades from the edges at the establishment. By the time that we started to get this work in New York and started to collaborate with much bigger teams and started to understand how to get something accomplished was complex. I understood that one has to work from the inside out, so it wasn't so much from the periphery throwing those grenades, it was really from the inside also being defiant and not necessarily doing what's expected, but trying to find a different path.
You and Rick Scafidio were the first architects to win the so-called Genius Award from the MacArthur Foundation, the prize for which one must not apply, but it brings with it the liberating, no strings attached stipend of $100,000 a year for 5 years, each of 5 years.
Now it does. Before it was a little less, but.
But other than providing time to think, what changes did this remarkable prize bring to your lives? What difference did it make to your careers?
Well, it was huge. We got it in 1999, and when I knew about the MacArthur, and I had heard of people in the arts that had received it, I never in a million years would have dreamt that we could have gotten it, or that was remotely possible. It was not given in architecture, and there's certainly, if it had been, there were certainly other people that might have deserved it before we did. It came as a total shock. We got a call, and I think at the time of the call, when I remember standing on a chair and just not believing it, we were told not to say anything to anyone. So it was very difficult, but it was huge, and it wasn't the money. That was the huge part. Of course, that was great and important.
The validation?
It was a validation. It was, we had worked in a cross-disciplinary way. We made site-specific installations. We went for grant money. We put a lot of projects on credit cards. This were independent projects that we generated in public space. We felt very, very strongly that you needed to express yourself even without commissions and without clients in the public realm, and not just in print and not just on the gallery wall, but actually in physical space.
So how'd you manage to do that without significant clients?
Oh. So wait a minute, let me finish the first. So,
okay.
So just to finish the first question, so we built our reputation, not unknowingly, around this independent work. Meanwhile, we also were teaching architecture, and we were very much inside of the discipline, and all of our colleagues were architects and or academics in architecture. And we had done maybe just one or two very small architectural things. But the moment that that call came in, it was a moment at which our work was recognized as architecture, and because it was significant, and that was the first one given in the discipline of architecture, and it was very, very specific to architecture. So we were amongst our friends and colleagues that many of them were very jealous that they had not gotten them, we were the first ones. Anyways, they were singling us out because our work was kind of in the zone of being interested in social issues, being interested in crossover practice, being interested in expanding the boundaries of architecture, and not just in professional architecture. So, to us, from that point forward, it was more of a kind of great feeling that what we were doing was not only accepted but validated and also respected. And then we just continued to do what we do and what we had been doing up to then.
As I recall, one of the catalysts for your change of mind was something that John Haydock said to you. Would you share that with us?
Huh.
His description of architecture.
How did you know that? So, wow, this is deep research. Well, you know, so the story goes when I was taking architectonics, I had no idea what it was. I had no idea. John Haydock was this larger-than-life figure, kind of a guru. Spoke in these very, like, you could not understand the kind of talked in parables, and you couldn't really understand exactly what he was ever talking about. But he had this fantastic presence, and I knew that there was something about this guy when I transferred to architecture school, because he wore, like, he was very tall, very burly, and wore sweaters with holes in the elbows, and that was just very undeanly, and I thought, wow, this guy must have something. Anyway, so one day I was at my architecture drafting table, which is like a tipped surface, and somehow he had a Babar toy on wheels. It was that elephant toy, and he put it at the top of the table, and he just came to my desk, and it just rolled down to the bottom of the table. Then he put it again on top of the table, rolled down, and he said, he had this very thick Bronx accent, and he said, "Dare, architecture, the trek of the arc." And I thought, what? What the hell does that mean? And I never really figured it out. I could never figure it out, but it was something about Babar, and it was about the trek of the arc. So I have, but whatever it was that he said, I thought, I gotta figure this out, so I might as well just get more deeply involved. And actually, he was an incredible influence. His work is not very well known. He was more of a poet, and he did a lot of work on paper.
And a great influence as a teacher.
Huge influence as a teacher. Many years, like running Cooper Union, being the dean of Cooper Union, many interesting architects went through the doors of Cooper. And he was a fantastic teacher that resisted the profession, and he very much felt that at that time when I was in school, that the profession was intellectually bankrupt, and what was kind of brought into the education was literature and film and all sorts of research of all types, and it was really trying to expand the horizons of the discipline of architecture in different ways. So the graduate of the school would not necessarily be absolutely prepared to go into an office, but would be a kind of person equipped to solve complex problems, would have analytical skills, and would also be someone that would actually generate kind of a new opportunities for architecture.
Let's turn to some of your recent projects. Long before you received the Highline Commission, the site had its own mythology. So how did you plan to give this post-industrial artifact a new and distinct image?
So the Highline, before any competition, was to an academic in architecture, this kind of great model of to kind of launch ideas off of. So people would give the problem, what do you do with the Highline, and the students would fantasize about it. There was a ideas competition early, and there were a lot of kind of crazy ideas brought to the table. But the moment that the real competition was put out there, and we were selected among 5 architects in this competition, we really began to think about what made the Highline so special. And I think that we had special insight as New Yorkers, actually, to it. Previously, the Highline was inaccessible, and there was a sense of danger. If you went in there, you sneaking in there. You were trespassing. You could be arrested. Highline was littered with you know, heroin needles and condoms and everything. It was just like a total mess. But it had this very subversive and interesting quality that made you kind of want to imagine being, you know, being there alone, but in a kind of subversive environment. When we did the competition, we wanted to figure out how to hold on to the kind of melancholia that is just in that place. And I think many, through a lot of contemplation, the kind of the strangeness of the place is that it is old New York. It is the place of that has been forgotten. It's the place of strange collisions. It's a place of sides of buildings that were never meant to be seen. It's the unofficial New York. It had so many kind of abject qualities that were really interesting. And the problem was, if you brought the public up to that level, would that entirely be gone? Or how could you maintain a level of this melancholia or this kind of a sense of nostalgia for a New York that was kind of irretrievable? It's the back, it's the you know, the stuff without value. It was kind of value free. And that's what we were very, very attracted to. So it hadn't been discovered at that point by developers and all of that. In fact, Giuliani, as you remember, signed the court order to tear it down. So this was a really kind of an effort to say that there's something very beautiful in its abjectness and its ugliness, and can we make that available to the public and maintain this kind of ecologies that were there just by themselves. And you know, one more thing I should add is that over the course of time since it became a ruin, like around 1980, it became the self-seeded landscape that seeds either coming off of rail cars or airborne or birdborne, blown about, just kind of took root. And every block was different because the blocks were, some were kind of environments, shady environments and wet environments, and some were wind-blown and sun-drenched and so forth. And so the ecologies on each moment of the site were different. That's what we discovered. And we thought, how could we also preserve that? This really unworldly, weird environment. And that's what the motive was. And I think that we took a decidedly kind of quiet voice in the articulation of the paving system and very few moves. And I think that really, there was a connection with Friends of the High Line, with Amanda Burden at that time, and that there's some kind of feeling like that we got it and we understood it, and we had the same kind of value objectives.
You had a very good client too.
A brilliant client, and absolutely fantastic. And are you among them? It was, you know, and the Robert Hammond and Josh David, the two kids that kind of just felt like, you know, like this thing should be in their hands, you know, and
heard about it first at a community board, two young men, and by now you probably know, who never knew each other before they met at the community board, and were informed that the then mayor issued an order to tear it down. So in some ways, not unlike the recent election, they rose up and decided we can do something about it. Well, they have, and certainly could not have done it without you and Rick. Since then, the High Line has had a genuinely euphoric effect on life, not only in New York. Every community wants its own High Line, even if it doesn't have an elevation, even if it doesn't have wildlife. They think it will be the catalyst for remarkable things in their community. So the dynamic original design, which by now most of you know, cuts through blocks and buildings, and as Liz mentioned, the last carload were frozen turkeys. And then followed by your inspired designs, which have not only attracted people and commerce and added sparkle to a neglected area of Manhattan. Did you ever expect the way this project has taken off, the crowds, the national, the international response?
Yeah, not in a million years. It was, well, we did it as concerned New Yorkers. And of course, we've always find that if we think of ourselves as the audience and the public, we'll probably do okay. And that's kind of how we designed it. But we thought that it would work as a park, but we never thought that it would be as much of a magnet and a catalyst as it turned out to be. Of course, it was argued as the catalyst. That was the way that that Robert and others kind of gathered around the project and said that this is going to help development, and it's very important for New York and evolving the far west side of Manhattan. But you know, even as that notion of catalyst, I mean, no one understood what kind of a financial catalyst it would be. But if you take that aside for a moment and think, you know, okay, their developers are having a, you know, a field day. But if you think about the kind of the reaction worldwide, and then everyone wants to partake of this highline effect, it's actually a great thing. And despite the fact that we poo-poo that no one could ever make anything like the highline, because it was kind of great before we got there. We pride ourselves in not having screwed it up. You know, it is fantastic. It's New York. It's dense. It's crazy. It's leftover. It's got these great juxtapositions, and we highlighted them and we dramatized them a bit. But when we start to see highlines all over the world, they don't have that context necessarily. But what is really fabulous and like the upside of the effect is that communities are thinking about reusing infrastructure and rethinking how it can be updated and made, you know, much more connected to things that are happening today.
Well, obviously what happened with the High Line could be described as the perfect storm. Mm-hmm. As you know, for several years now, I've been pressing for a High Line in Queens at a specific site, and I honestly believe one day and soon it will occur. But you said before that the High Line made you melancholy. I didn't know actually that was your phrase, because I've often heard James Cormer, who is the lead landscape designer of the project, describing it as sad and melancholic. Most people who go there for joy and uplift. Do you still feel that way now that it is so inhabited and sometimes over-inhabited?
Yes. You know, I think there's something very peculiar about the place that triggers two different kinds of emotions, or maybe more than two. One is this kind of longing for an irretrievable history of New York that is maybe a little dirty, a little messy. You know, it's not the perfect historically preserved. It's just kind of that part of industrial New York that is kind of, it's gone. And those buildings remind us of that. And that's why there's this post-industrial feel and that melancholia that we didn't really want to lose, because, you know, when you think about preservation, what are we preserving? We're preserving moldings, we're preserving feelings, we're preserving, you know, how do you preserve histories? So there's something there that's in the air.
So you were looking beyond the rivets and the
Yes.
surface ornamentation
Yeah.
to a larger purpose.
Yes.
And I think that's why the project is so successful.
And, you know, and I think that for the time being, and I don't know how far into the future it's going to feel this way, but because the lots are abandoned and because there is this kind of, it's natural is this forgotten New York and
Lost New York.
Lost New York, and it's there, and you just really can't, it's very hard to pry it away. However, you know, when I mentioned that there are multiple emotions that one feels, on the other side, there is I think a concern, maybe a skepticism, you know, that maybe it's too popular and it's too successful for its own good, and that maybe one day it will eat itself up. And so, you know, some of the new glass towers that are sprouting here on this side and that side, and the kind of the concern about what is that part of New York going to be? Is it going to feel in 10 years, 15 years monocultural? Is it going to feel all the same texture once those parking lots are filled up? So I think that there is this kind of moment of strange balance of looking backwards and looking forwards, and both of them are a little bit uncomfortable, you know, that it's not, and I think that's what's attractive. Now, there's another thing that goes on. The third emotion is that people are enjoying it. People are like, they cruise and they promenade and they do something that New Yorkers typically don't do, or people in New York typically don't do, and that is nothing. It's a place for nothingness, and that's what's so compelling. And when we did this sunken overlook over 10th Avenue that overlooks the traffic, that was the epitome of a place where you can't really do much on the High Line except walk or sit. Well, why not sit and look at taillights, you know?
But now there are spaces for performance, art exhibited throughout. Is that changing the flavor?
I think that it is, and I would prefer if there was less on the High Line. And we took a very strong position at the beginning, at the competition stage, that this should not be the street. There shouldn't be any cafes, there shouldn't be any bookstores, there shouldn't be anything really to do. It should be this unique, elevated moment where all you can do is just kind of move slowly. Also, we had, because we're parallel to Hudson River Park, we felt that here is, Hudson River Park is a fast park. It's right next to moving traffic. It's
this is the unpark.
That's right. So there's bikes and rollerblades and all of that. And here, this is a place for old-fashioned promenading. And we just felt that the slowness was its character.
What are your favorite sections or elements of the project?
Of the High Line?
Yes.
I think I'm very proud of the paving idea, of the paving system, because it's a system of digitizing the surface and feathering together mineral and vegetal material, in some kind of other blend. I think that as a system, that's like the thing. And then as a spot, I do like the sunken overlook. I think it always amazes me that it's a kind of new Zen garden, It's like you sit and you stare, and it's like looking into a lava lamp or a fireplace or something like that, mesmerizing. But there's really there's nothing dramatic, there's nothing theatrical. It's just a kind of continuous movement, and I think that to me is like the crystallization of the project.
Is there a particular experience that you would like people to have as they walk the High Line?
Well, I think that there, as architects always do, we like to imagine kind of the choreography of a space. Like, here's where you start, here's what you're supposed to experience here and there, over there, and on your way out you should experience this. In the High Line, there are lots of moments that kind of you twist your neck and you look a little harder. I think that that's the most important thing, that people are looking harder at things that they would normally take for granted, the neglected stuff. So a little harder at the blank wall and the texture of the blank wall, a little harder, or even sound that comes to the high line of a schoolyard, or a radio coming just out of a window, an open window. It sensitizes you to a lot of stuff that that you don't get when you're on the ground, because we're so oversaturated. The world is so oversaturated with stimulus that the moment you go up there and there's less real stuff, there's less heroic stuff to look at. There's no digit. I actually get annoyed when people take out their devices on the High Line, like, I'm very old-fashioned. All of a sudden I become very old-fashioned. Like, I've become really purist about this nothingness. But, in the end, we can't regulate everything, there's the whole issue of, people expressing themselves, the First Amendment on the High Line and so forth, that you cannot kind of prevent things from happening that may not be aesthetically perfect. But it is its own thing, and it offers surprises all of the time. Like the Renegade Cabaret, that great cabaret singer that used to come out on her fire escape and,
performances.
She would give performances, but there was a construction light that by chance was shining on her window. It was just by accident, and she just saw that as an opportunity to be in the spotlight, and she would come out and sing. But there's lots of stuff that happens like that are unexpected and kind of welcome.
You alluded to it before, and I've heard you refer to it and read about the fact that you think, at least sometimes, that architecture is nothing but a special effects machine which delights, which disturbs the senses, and that you challenge the assumptions and conventions of space as you build architecture out of atmosphere. Firstly, what does that really mean?
Did I say that? Wow, you're digging up some weird stuff.
You've said it frequently, by the way.
Well, I do.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I do mean that architecture is special effects. I do mean that very much. Go back to the Pantheon. What is that? It's a vessel of light and frames sunlight in a very particular way. Open air makes a space that it really actually has no purpose. I think that in virtually all the work that we do, and many other architects, we're trying to produce certain kinds of spatial, optical, environmental effects. And the bricks and mortar are, of course, a part of it. That's the material that we use. Program is the pretext, that we do this with. But the producing something that is a little bit, and the High Line does that. It produces effects as well. That's something that we take very seriously. The atmosphere, architecture of atmosphere, I think that we had an opportunity in 2002, 2003 to make a building or a project, let's say. Is
this Neuchâtel?
It's the Neuchâtel called the Blur Building, and this was for the Swiss Expo 2002, 2003, and it sat on the lake it sat on the lake, and it was basically a cloud, and it was the size of a football field, and it basically took the water from the lake and filtered it, and then shot it through a whole system of fog nozzles. So we made a structure to hold this plumbing, and the plumbing kind of produced 35,000 fog nozzles, produced this blur, which was what we call it architecture of atmosphere, because there was really no space. It was kind of like a habitable medium, and you walked into it, and it felt different. The temperature was less. You could barely see through it. There was nothing to do and nothing to see, except really focus on our dependence on the master sense, on vision. And that was its main purpose. But many other projects are atmospheric, and we also believe that you can make architecture without using a lot of material.
Was the blur, and that literally was its name, a perfect precursor to your work not only on the High Line almost a decade later, but Lincoln Center?
Interesting.
And the opposite end of that continuum.
Yeah, I think you're right. The High Line is related in that large environmental project, large scale environmental project. Was the Blur was actually a kind of mass project. It was the first time we were thinking about audience, and before that, you know, we were kind of renegades, and we had a following, and that following was mostly artists and kind of an art crowd and an academic crowd. And when we did Blur, we really thought very, very hard about how to create something that would have an international audience, would have an audience of all ages, all different levels of education. You know, basically it was all-encompassing. So, and the Blur operated on many levels at the same time. There was an academic part of it that we were very interested in, around perception and around the theory of the cloud, which came from an art historian. And at the same time, it was like a place where kids got lost in, and everyone had a different interpretation of whether this was surreal or whether this was somehow religious, and it was about ascension. And there were so many different interpretations of what we did. And we realized that that we were, for the first time, cutting through the strata of culture and really hitting a kind of a much bigger population. And we realized that that didn't mean that we were doing anything less well, that somehow was appealing to a common denominator. No, just the opposite, that we were able to achieve a project that that was read in so many different ways and had so many different points of interest and angles of interest. And in the High Line, it turned out very much the same way, that, you know, beyond our wildest dreams, it really works for a huge cross-section, international audiences, huge cross-section of the population, and it's something that everyone respects. And, you know, we see no graffiti, we see no crime, it's like something that's really embraced by everyone. And so I think that those two projects, environmental scale and kind of big appeal, they're connected. Now,
let's move on to the big appeal.
So then there's Lincoln Center.
Yes. Am I correct that you first became involved with Lincoln Center nearly a decade ago? Yeah. And then as time moved on, there was a competition. Can you tell us how you got involved with Lincoln Center, this neighborhood's backyard?
We were invited to it wasn't exactly a competition, it was an interview process by Rebecca Robertson, who was in charge of the 42nd Street redevelopment.
And now in charge of the Park Avenue Armory.
Very successfully. She was at that point, we knew her from 42nd Street. She became the director of the Lincoln Center Development Project, so that intermediary between the constituent organizations, the architects, and all the other people around the project, and the city, and so forth. So we were invited to into this very elite group of architects, most of which were very well established in New York and elsewhere. And we thought we didn't have a chance in hell of getting this project. And Rebecca thought that we were the right people because she had seen our installation at one of the abandoned porno theaters on 42nd Street, which had this very large set of lips that were soliciting to the street, but the solicitations were not sexual at all. It was more like impossible dreams. And for us, it was a very important project. It was called Soft Cell, And it was part of a Creative Times series of installations of artworks on this transitional site that was going from a red light district into a kind of Disneyfied, new environment, and it was just that place in between. And so we made this installation as part of the kind of work that we used to do. We still do a little bit of that. I think because she felt that we could handle the media, and it was part of Lincoln Center's goal to somehow take the energy that was happening in the halls and reveal it somehow, maybe through media. So we were on this list with Richard Meyer and who was on that? Who else was on that list? Go up.
Well, that doesn't matter.
Anyway, there were a bunch of
competition.
Norman Foster.
Yes,
Foster was on that list.
Somebody else, but I can't remember.
Yeah,
who is it?
Gary. Gary kind of decided to bail. He bailed early. And Maneo. Yeah, there were a bunch of interesting architects. So what in the interview, and they had asked us to come up with some ideas, some thoughts in 3 weeks. How we saw the campus going forward. And we thought we had absolutely nothing to lose, and we started to free associate, and we started to make some images, and there were some really wacky things that we came up with. And we showed it to the leadership.
What was the
There
wackiest?
was a roof, like a rotating roof on a big arm that was on the corner of Fisher Hall, that would cover Josie Robertson Plaza, and then it would rotate around, and it would shade the North Plaza, so it created light and shade out of the same device. But
Did that work?
Well, it worked in our little animation, but I think that they thought, because we had a lot of ideas. We took the in the North Plaza, the pool. We undermined the pool, and we put a restaurant underneath it and made it a kind of shading canopy that went down into the street, if you could imagine that, like sculpting it out. It was impossible to do because that's where the central mechanical plant is. We didn't know that at the time. But I think that they were genuinely kind of charged by our enthusiasm around the project. And
we've transformed their image, really, as well as animate the space in a way that is surprising. Your firm was responsible for most of the reconstruction and design of this billion-dollar project. And the thing that intrigues me the most, there were so many stakeholders at Lincoln Center, such a large complex, 12 constituent organizations, and practically everybody in this room knows what I'm talking about. And these organizations having differing priorities and demands, and sometimes conflicting agendas, plus the impact of the community board and historic preservationists. How did you manage to maneuver through all of this, and what was the process?
Wow.
I'm sure that's how you felt then, too.
Well, I think that if I knew then early what I learned later, I would have, Rick and I would have walked away from the project, because it was so incredibly complicated. And I don't know if some of you know the way the governance works in Lincoln Center. You need unanimity on any change in public space. So those 12 constituent organizations each have boards, and they have general directors, general managers, and artistic directors, and so those are the 12. There has to be unanimity with all of them. That's the first part. The fact that it sits on property that half of it is city property, and there was some city money involved. That there was a task force from the city that was composed of the commissioners, all the major commissioners. And we reported directly to them as well, and so we had that. And then there was sensitivity historically, and so there was. I see Arlene someplace in the group. I saw Arlene there, and we had many conversations across time, and Docomomo as well. And then there was it was a Euler process, so there was community board, and there were just so many constituents that, and to do the project involved lots of collaborations with other architects and also with many, many consultants. And it was an ongoing, it was basically design in between meetings. You know, we just slipped in a little design. And you know, at the beginning, the way I characterized, or our feeling about it when we, the year 1 or 2 into this, we
How
were...
many years were there in all?
Like probably 9.
And it's still going on?
It's still some little touch-ups, you know, and the bridge was the last piece, formally the last. Well, there's talk about the realizing the Amsterdam corner, which has
How about that shaded roof?
I still remember it. It's one of our best ideas there. But anyway, what I complained about then was it's 99% perspiration for 1% inspiration. That's the cliche of doing the complicated work. And I realized along the way, sometime maybe into year 4 or 5, that the 99% is actually the most creative part. It's the consensus building. It's the, you know, working inside of the networks.
Is it performance art as well?
It is. I guess it is. I think you need to speak in several tongues. You need to be able to understand what's at stake for each constituency. You need to, and you know, and in the end, I feel very much that we never compromised our vision, our objectives. We just told the story in lots of different ways, you know, for different...
What was your objective? To integrate the campus of Lincoln Center more tightly with the surrounding community, among other things?
There were many things. Well, one was, well, the stated goal was to make Lincoln Center more Lincoln Center than Lincoln Center. So, and by that we meant to kind of bring out some of its unrealized potential and maybe rethink some of the urban planning mistakes that had been made. And it's, you know, it's no surprise. I mean, that the campus was very fortified. It was felt very elitist. It was not integrated into the campus. It was done so very thoughtfully, you know, at the time that it was built for a suburban public that wanted to be shielded. And it was part of that mega block planning that was so popular at the time. When, you know, the socioeconomic and political condition had changed drastically in 50 years. And we very much, like the leadership at Lincoln Center, wanted to democratize the campus, wanted to turn it inside out, wanted to bring what was going on inside of the institutions outside, and, you know, for us, bringing the city into Lincoln Center with or without tickets. You know, like a lot of people can't afford $300 Met Opera tickets, but why not open it up? And I think the leadership, you know, the open air concerts and the public space use now is much more than ever
vibrant.
Yeah.
But how do you make architecture out of urbanism that was created so long ago?
Yeah, that was a really, really tough thing, because you usually, architecture is smaller grain, urbanistic decisions are really big. We started to break down the edges, basically. We saw the Lincoln Center is basically planned on top of a garage and a mechanical plant, and that's what elevates the level on the Columbus Avenue side, maybe 4 feet, but on Amsterdam Avenue, about 18, 20 feet. And that level, which you feel when you're on the plaza, is very flat and all the buildings sit on top of it, is actually a plinth. It's a base. And in our minds, that was the single gesture that was, that on the one hand brought these institutions together in one place, but also tore it apart from the city. So our hope was to erode the edges of this plinth, to make it transparent, to make the stairs wider, to take the car out of the picture as much as possible. and then to integrate new media and a landscape, and kind of play with the large scale, the mega scale, and the small scale of the citizen at the same time. So on the one hand, fulfilling certain goals like the monumental entrance, which Lincoln Center never had. It had this symmetry with a Met right in the middle, and then just in front it was a road, a 2-lane drop-off road, and then a couple of stairs to a very 12-foot wide street, a sidewalk, then 11 lanes of traffic. And so once you've gone past those lanes of traffic and you've arrived on the sidewalk, then you went up this little measly stair, and then you arrived at another 2-lane road. And so you would be, then if you hadn't been plowed down by then, you would be plowed down at that point. And so, by submerging that road and to make a public entrance for people that are coming by foot from trains or walking, everyone would go up that stair. And so we made this very big gesture of actually stretching that whole zone in front of the New York State Theater and the New York and Avery Fisher Hall. We stretched it basically to press the road and stretch the stair across as a porte cochere, as a bridge. But because that gesture was so monumental, we felt that we had to demonumentalize it by putting electronic media in the risers. So it was both and, working within the
but
DNA.
That electronic billboard to the world really does inform, I think, and animate the space.
It does, and it's not so ostentatious a monumental entrance. It's a kind of monumentality on our terms, which is mediated and which is public, and it's about information. It's not about making this kind of symbolic entrance to the rarefied domain of the arts. It's much more about bringing the street and making a walkable kind of media welcome mat or walkable marquee.
Do you think the renovation, so to speak, has affected their programming?
I'm not sure I would go that far. I think that there was this healthy synergy between what Lincoln Center wanted to do on the insides and what we wanted to do, on the campus. And it really had to do with appealing to the next generations of patrons that would come there for new programming as well. It was time to kind of shake things up a little bit. So Peter Gelb, Ellen Gilbert, just all throughout, just a kind of different generation of creative people that were trying to stimulate the next thing, but also very respectful to what was there. And I think that's what we shared, that our project was not one that erased what was there. It was one that worked with the DNA, translated it to something that would be welcoming, would be transparent, and would be kind of just connected, a better interface with the city than was there before. And I think that's the programming is trying to do that as well. Slowly.
If you didn't have a career as an architect, what would you be doing?
Well, I would be a filmmaker.
I think we're inching along tonight. What's the last thing you Googled?
Oh my God, the last thing I Googled, probably the restaurant that we were at last night. I don't know. We were having, so Rick and I, we eat out a lot, and we very often sit in very noisy restaurants, and sometimes we talk to each other on our cell phones, opposite on either side of the table, and then we often
that
find
sounds like a Woody Allen or Steve Martin movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like that, and it's very intimate. But then we're always like, look up that fact, and it's just like with you, your partner, and Google at the table having dinner. You must experience that.
Never on the phone. Did you ever expect your life to unfold the way it has?
No. I never thought that far. As a kid, I was kind of interested in the present and the immediate conditions and sensations. And I never worried about what I was going to be doing in 5 years or 10 years. Not like kids now that go to college and, are already preparing, for their lives and have all their future planned by their parents. My parents never did that, and at the time that I was growing up, I was interested in music, and I was interested in just doing my own stuff, and I wasn't really thinking how it would apply, that it would make a difference. I wasn't thinking about a career, but I was always ambitious, and when Rick and I kind of came together at Cooper Union, and we were together deciding to kind of just try to do something meaningful, but outside of the parameters of the way that profession defined itself. But we never, ever imagined that we would be affecting our own city. And architects rarely ever have a chance to do anything in the cities that they live in. Usually those cities neglect them, and they get a reputation doing something someplace else, and then late in their lives, they get brought back to...
We are affecting another city now. When does the Broad Museum open? Liz is the architect of the Eli Broad Museum in Los Angeles as well.
Yeah, so our studio has been working on that for now a couple of years. It's in construction, and we think it will open sometime in 2014, like probably the middle of 2014. So it's a very complicated building. It sits right opposite Disney Hall on Grand Avenue, and it's another project in which urbanization is an issue. In New York, it was easier to work with Lincoln Center because the context was already so strongly there. It was just a matter of breaking down the walls. In Los Angeles, the downtown is, most of you know, it's not very well populated, and there have been attempts after attempt of urbanizing downtown Los Angeles. And, and whether our building is going to help that, I don't know. There's a series of cultural institutions that's all in a row. Ours opens to the public, and it makes many gestures to the public that other institutions on that strip don't do. And so I feel that we're contributing, but, a building can't make a city.
What can?
I think a really great alliance between an administration, a great administration, which I think we're the benefactors of the Bloomberg administration in the past years, really smart commissioners that really cared about public space and cared about culture. That with out-of-the-box thinking, grassroots efforts on the part of citizens to take matters into their own hands sometimes and just provoke things that actually, political leaders might never have thought of, and kind of opening up the doors for people that were, not the obvious candidates to have a chance to express themselves. I think it was like we've been really in the perfect alignment of the stars.
Provoking. Here's a question that I think is meant to do that. Mm-hmm. And if you don't reply, I'm going to.
Okay.
How many sprained, twisted ankles have been reported or occurred on the High Line's irregular, hard to see walking surface where one's attention is not? How would you reply to that?
Well,
you agree with it?
There have been a couple of cases where, where the public is, someone is looking over there and moving in that direction and stumbles. Yeah, that has happened. And, what we tried to do...
This may be one of them.
There may be. What we tried to do is we designed lips at the edges. There are different paving elements, and there are many of them, and they taper in different ways, and they have different edge conditions. And we tried to actually design with that in mind. It doesn't work 100% of the time, because you do have the kind of mating of the green with the paving, and so in order to do that, it's not so easy. You can't just do a fence and a normal lip. I think that, given the millions of people, that go up on the High Line, the unbelievable few incidents that there are is pretty remarkable. People have trips and falls everywhere,
Well, that was the point I was going to make, contrasted to the city streets.
There are, really everywhere where there, and, when you try to do something that's a little bit special, you become, it's your fault. But it's actually, people should watch where they're walking, and we have tried, and there are some. Do you want to respond to that, Rick? He's
just we were required to try to put a curb edge because they were concerned that people would walk into the planting.
I remember that.
That
Yeah.
reduced that bump, which
Yeah.
we did not want.
Yeah.
But there was an insistence.
Has everyone heard his reply?
No.
They were required to put in a curb edge, and that is part of the problem. Is that an accurate
I think
response?
that may be part of it, that there's a topography shift, when you're walking on paving and then becomes green, naturally it's at a different level and it's softer. So, that's another thing. But I actually, I hope that's not a huge problem, and we have not heard a lot of complaints, but occasionally it does happen.
Here's another question. How often do you and Rick walk on the High Line? This person says that they would just love the idea of the two of you taking a morning stroll. Do you have time to do that?
We don't often have that much time to do that, but we really do love to walk on the High Line ourselves and be anonymous. That's the important thing. And, we often, when we do, we typically do it like early or late in the day. I think the best experience we ever had actually was before Section 2 opened. And we got the High Line to ourselves for a great picnic. And we were able to, for a moment before the popularity, experience the whole Section 2 ourselves, and that was really
Do
fantastic.
you want to give a little preview of coming attractions? What's next?
On the High Line?
Yes.
Well, there's a phase 3 that's coming, and it's kind of like it's the only project that we have ever done that is done kind of like salami, a little bit at a time, and just a little bit. It's like halfway, and then it's a third of the way, and another. It's always Zeno's paradox. So we call it amongst ourselves High Line 3.0. And it takes some of the aspects of the High Line and it kind of ratchets up a little bit of some of the functional elements, like the paving has slightly different configuration. It does more things. It's more intelligent in certain areas. There's an area that is for kids. There will be more activities. It's a very interesting moment at 30th Street where a High Line takes a bend, and then there's a part that goes under Coach, that will go under the Coach building to the spur, which has yet to be programmed and designed. So that we're very much still in the design of it. But to the west, it's similar in language, but it has some more features, like the ability to kind of understand the section of the High Line from a kid's point of view, like in the depth of it. And then beyond that is kind of territory that will be more wild and will not be that much architected, just very, very simple, that winds around the Hudson Yards.
Now, you have an assignment in that third part of the project from which you have been requested not to discuss. Don't discuss it, just tell us vaguely what it's about. It's called now The Shed.
Ah, okay. Well, I think it's okay to discuss it because the mayor did announce it, I think two weeks ago. This is really amazing thing that very rare opportunity for architects to actually come up with stuff from scratch. the Hudson Yards is being developed by Related, and it's going to be a very dense new.
Well, it is a city within our city.
Right.
So why don't you give them some idea of the enormity of this project?
It's huge. It spans from 30th Street to 34th. It spans from 10th Avenue to 12th, and the eastern rail yards between 10th and 11th that are being that is the first part to go ahead will have some very tall buildings, and we are actually designing 2 buildings in that complex. So the first one is what's called the Culture Shed, and there was an area, a site on Hudson Yards that the city decided would be some kind of cultural institution, 21,000 square feet devoted to the development of some kind of cultural purpose. And it was kind of just holding that territory, but there was no real idea about what institution wanted to expand or what new institution wanted to be there. There was an RFP out and kind of open call for ideas and suggestions. We answered that, and we teamed up with David Rockwell, who we often kind of play around coming up with ideas. And we came up with this notion of a new institution that would be cross-disciplinary art, performing arts, as well as bringing in creative industry like fashion and cuisine and design and so forth. So it would be unique in that it would bring together all of these forms, but also it was characterized by, because it was in the middle of the recession that we came up with it, an institution that would be largely financially self-sustainable. And how would it do that? And our idea was that it was an expandable footprint. So there would be a base building that a lot of these activities would be planned, and a shed that would actually roll on a track that nested on the base building.
We do like these mechanical parts.
We do. It was like a building that's basically a big vehicle. And in expanding the footprint, the extra large space could be used for very large art, like at the Tate, something in nature of that scale, very large events, but also could be a place where Fashion Week could be, or an arts fair or something like that. And those kinds of activities actually generated income, or even gala events. So we did an easy, fast business plan, and we kind of came up with, hey, one could balance the other. We could have creative industry support, independent visual arts and performing arts, and maybe there wasn't such a black and white condition as like the commerce side is dirty and the art side is pure. Maybe there could be something that's really conjoined. When we, this idea was supported by the city, and it actually met some of the city's already kind of prescribed goals of bringing in fashion and kind of making Hudson Yards more of a catalyst and a cultural catalyst. And there was another perfect alignment. And so we have been developing this project for the past 3 years, and it's now more and more real. We're going into, we're finishing up schematic design. This whole year has been devoted to that, with all of the programming and all of the
Is there anyone
basic
who's
design.
spoken up to occupy the space, or is it more the idea of a Kunsthalle?
It's the idea is it's kind of a it started off as a Kunsthal, like what does New York need that it doesn't have? It doesn't have a place that can take a lot of things that are unencumbered by long lead times, like the Museum of Modern Art or the Guggenheim, or institutions that are very heavy that way, and that you have to, have a co-production, takes 10 years and is very expensive. We thought that a lighter institution, but also one that would be really sensitive to New York's needs, that could collaborate with other institutions and also with a lot of non-for-profits that actually don't have a place to show their stuff and to incubate work. At the same time, it's also a public space, so that when the shed goes over and kind of nests, and there is this great opportunity to have free events, public events, and collaborate with all sorts of institutions where it would be non-ticketed and would really humanize this large development. That was part of our aim, was this development with huge glass buildings, with retail. How do you bring the community into it? How do you bring programming, cultural programming in that would be, that would bring global attention and local attention and interactivity with the place. So that's how it got born, and it was very much in alignment with what.
Is it still a shed?
It's still called Culture Shed. It still has a shed, and it's very much in planning. It's still in planning, so we haven't gone through all of the approvals, but it is kind of looking better and better, and there's just an enormous amount of interest and support for this thing. So that's one of the projects, and what's kind of great is it's along the High Line. And we feel that it's kind of an opportunity to do an ensemble, the park and a cultural space at the same time, and one that there's nothing like that.
Well, it's a really exciting project, as has everything you discussed this evening. We are overstaying our generous welcome by the church, but I do want you to just answer one question. Whatever's on top wins. What building or project or park, other than your own, do you most admire in New York City?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one. I would have to say there's one part of me that wants to say the interior of Statue of Liberty, because it's just unbelievably psychedelic, weird, hallucinatory space. The inside of this body that is formed in copper and just moving through it is unbelievable and very abstract.
Cubist.
Weird. I don't know what I would even call it. It's an inside-out experience. The other place that I've always sent people to is the PS1, the James Turrell's room in PS1 that has a beautiful relationship with the sky and just very kind of strange and destabilizing space.
If you had it to do over again, what would you do otherwise?
I don't know, what would you do?
Make a film.
I probably, besides that thing that I still long for, whatever happened, the way it happened is perfect, and I'm kind of really happy that I'm kind of partially the victim of circumstance.
It sounds like not a victim, but the privilege of circumstance. And it's been our privilege to talk with you tonight. Please join me in thanking Liz Diller for her informative, provocative idea. Wonderful. And thanks to each and all of you for joining us here tonight.